lot of interesting points that you raised there. And one of the things that you did mention is you're still willing to, fork out money for follow-on investment rounds, being a pragmatic early stage investor, helping your startups do bridge rounds as well. The question that obviously arises in that context is, so clearly founders have options that are dwindling, right? In an environment where whether it's capital from an existing investor or from elsewhere, it is scarce to come by. If you were to wear the founder's hat, what would your first option be? Come to someone like you, an existing investor, ask for bridge funding, or some of the other options to extend the runway? Would there be bank loans, working capital facilities, overdrafts? And what would you advise them as an existing investor? Why take investor money or any of the other kinds of money that I just described? Maybe if you could just lay out some of the options for our viewers and listeners here to understand what are some of the factors that founders have to think of before they decide what's the right kind of money that they should be taking at this point in time.
No, fundamental principle that needs to be applied when you're taking money is to make sure that the person giving the money understands the expectations that you're setting for this money. And you believe that these expectations can be met with a high probability.
Okay.
And I'm being careful, right? I'm saying you need to believe that you'll be able to deliver. There's no 100% guarantees in life. The reason I say this is because these are times where people need to believe each other and sort of walk the tightrope. Money may be available in different shapes, forms, and terms. And I would counsel my own friends and founders and entrepreneurs that I work with to make sure that you take money from people that you enjoy working with, who understand the risk that you're taking, and who relate to you. One also needs to keep in mind that options are dwindling, like you rightly said, right? So you don't have 10 people to sort of pick from. I think going to your existing investors is the right thing to do at this point of time, because you need to first validate if they have the confidence in you, if they are willing to double down on you.
Oh.
I think that's a great starting point to then say that now that you've got your existing guys doubling down on you, you could possibly then go out and explore to newer investors to see if they're willing to come in on board. Of course, options of debt are there, and I believe there are some announcements that are being made very recently, particularly in India, where debt may be more available to some of these MSMEs. I don't know enough. I must only say that debt is money that you have to return. It's not equity risk money, and hence you as an individual founder need to be aware of whatever that you're signing up for.
Okay.
Right. So I think if debt is an option, you should definitely take up debt. I mean, we encourage a lot of our founders to look up TDB, because if they're building deep tech or frontier tech technologies, then they should sort of leverage some of these avenues available. But it's very case specific to what you're trying to build and what sort of capital is available. For example, those companies where revenues are visible, venture debt is a good option. Where cash flow is visible, then venture debt is also a good option. But specific to seed companies, specific to early stage, I think it's a good time to sort of go and validate existing investor interest before you sort of go out, or at least get a perspective from your existing investor, because they have a lot of data about you and working with you, and hence that will be very valuable in sort of overlaying that perspective on making some of these decisions. We do need to keep in mind that my answer is very biased towards the stage that I operate. If you're a consumer-facing company that's raised a couple of $1 billion, then you'll have a very different approach to how you'll go about doing this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that, because the other factor that, with debt, you also are looking at businesses or founders that have the ability to offer up some kind of collateral. And the earlier the stage of the business, it is fair to state that the ability to provide collaterals to debt investors or to say even to banks as well is limited. Therefore, you would probably be pushed back to going back to your existing investor, even if.
Well, I think sorry to interject. For example, I read somewhere that there are collateral-free loans that may be given. venture debt, for example, is actually a collateral-free loan. What's important to keep in mind, it's not just a collateral, it's not just that something additional is on the line. You need to now step back and figure out if this is the cost of capital that can withstand your business.
Right.
Is the cost of capital 18% or is the cost of capital infinity? And maybe sometimes infinity is okay.
Right.
Right. So one needs to sort of figure that part out. And I think that's where it's sort of important to go back and talk to your existing investors, because one, they have a mind of an investor and they've got experience with them. And more importantly, they have very relevant data of having worked with you as a founder and having understood your business. They've spent time with you. So I think they will have their ability to back you or not back you will be very critical in sort of understanding what the rest of the world will.
Fair enough. Coming back to the original context to this conversation as well. Now, when you go back to your existing investor, it's one thing to say that the existing investor will put money in, but it's also another thing to understand what are the terms at which the existing investor is going to put money in, right? And that is where we come back to the concept of barbarian terms or barbarian investors as well.
Sure.
So when a founder comes to you, when I say you, I'm not only referring to you personally or to Speciale, I'm talking of any investor here, right? The cards are already stacked against founders in most cases. You may say, yeah, that there are certain companies that are fundamentally very strong companies who can withstand any kind of recessionary environment, right? But large number of companies today will probably go back to their existing investors, but will also now then need to be cognizant of terms that will be put to them. I think the starting point will be what valuation, but then we also get into the other clauses that we're actually going to be discussing in a short while. But just wanted to understand, when you know that there are very few options before the founder, does it impact the way you transact with your founder?
So I think there are 2 or 3 ways to sort of slice and dice it to give what will never be a correct answer, but to give you some perspective, right? One is to say that, this investor-founder relationship is a very delicate balance to put out there. And the report card of this relationship is constantly being measured on a cap table. The earlier the stage, the more delicate it is. I mean, there may be times where investors hold a certain large percentage and then the capital structure becomes less favorable for new investors to come in. And one needs to be very cognizant of that. One needs to be cognizant of what stage the company is. And what is the next ideal goal that all shareholders are optimizing for. If you're looking to raise another round in a year from now, then you will be careful on what sort of terms you put out now, because whatever you write now in that document is going to set a precedence for the future. Unless, of course, the future is so far away that you can then either people forget or you can justify it for the risks that you're taking. What I mean by that, and I'm sort of trying to zero down on answers, I think the earlier the stage, the less likely you'll have these unfavorable situations, because you want to make sure that founders are motivated and the capital structure allows you to sort of progress. So shorter the runways that you're sort of building out in these fundings, the less likely that you will have these kind of less favorable, less founder-friendly terms coming in. The later the stage, the more theoretically inflated your valuation is. Again, theoretically inflated is from one's own view, it's very subjective. The less NPV you have. Consumer-facing startup doing great, but you're going to be out of cash in a month. At the end of that month, what is your net present value? Pretty much zero. These are situations where investors who are writing large checks that build for long runways will tend to look at past as sunk cost and take a fresh look. And I'm only quoting this, and I haven't spoken to any of the people who did this deal, but the deal led by Uber and a bunch of financial investors essentially devalued Lime down by about 85%. Now, one way to look at it is to say that they were barbarian and that, they used this opportune time to nail everybody down on the cap table and bring them down to zero. But the other way to look at it is okay, given where Lime is at the moment, what is its net present value? And if its net present value is low and I am bringing enough capital to give itself a long runway, then I have every reason to reprice it.
Yeah.
This is my risk reward.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the interesting perspective that makes normal people be perceived as barbarians. I still think they're normal people because they're just seeing it from a very different lens, and from their lens, their vision is still 2020.
Yeah, absolutely, and I completely understand that perspective because, as you said right at the beginning, you also have to understand that VC investors are accountable to their LPs.
Very true.
And so, therefore, economic metrics in many ways, and more so in a downturn, will probably override the ability of a founder to sell a story.